Homeland Security, along with the U.S. Immigrations and Customs Enforcement Office, have placed a large and rather interesting order. They've ordered 450 million rounds of ammunition to be made and delivered to them over the next 5 years.
Everyone knows that the U.S. is waging a war in Afghanistan, Iraq, Pakistan, and many other countries around the Arab world. But a lot don't know that the U.S. is also waging war in Latin America.
And in war, we're not supposed to know who we're allying with until after we fire off the Tomahawk missiles. Is that ready, shoot, aim? I forget. Isn't that what everybody was whining about with Bush for 8 years? And now, all of a sudden, it's all justifiable in the name of humanity.
Well, some schools in the U.S. looking more like juvenile detention centers. There's a growing trend of police officers patrolling school halls. And with that, more kids getting arrested. The biggest offense,
disrupting humanitarian interest. Obviously, one is the oil. It costs $1 per barrel of oil to get at Libya's oil. And the thing is, Libya is willing to sell it to you. So there's no reason you don't have to go into to Libya and force them point a gun at their head to make them sell you their oil. That's ridiculous. The other thing is that Libya has vast reserves of gold, and Libya was in the process of championing an African dinar backed by gold,
right?
And that would rival the euro.
Well, it would have sidestepped the whole Rothschild game, and that's something you don't do.
Exactly. And
what about these rebels? These people who are fighting for democracy? First of all, have you noticed that they are proudly waving around a monarchy flag in the name of democracy? Have you also wondered why the fighting is lasting so long in Libya if they are armed and have NATO, the most powerful army in the world, backing them up? I'll tell you why. Because of the Gaddafi supporters. The media is ignoring or belittling them at best. They constitute the majority of the population, and they support their leader, and they don't need guns. They have their strength in numbers. Most importantly, they are the real freedom fighters fighting for a democratic system that puts ours to shame.
An executive order signed by President Obama has sparked controversy on both sides of the political aisle. The National Defense Resources Preparedness Executive Order was signed quietly Friday night. It gives the president the power to control U.S. resources in times of war and peace, and this includes food, water, oil, and transportation. Now, some are concerned this could lead to the executive branch having absolute authority over the nation's resources, and others question if this is all in preparation to go to war with Iran. Here's White House Press Secretary Jay Carney's answer to that question at a press conference.
Some online commentary suggesting this gives the executive branch power to allocate energy, food, water in either peacetime or wartime. And there are some conservative blogs that are pushing the notion that this suggests the White House is preparing for a war with Iran. Can you explain what this executive order was?
Well, I cannot explain that reaction to it. I think it was a fairly standard and routine piece of news.
I mean, it doesn't even sound like Spanish, but I guess, the stuff going on in Libya is, they are right next to Mexico, and that's our goal, is to get down there for humanitarian reasons to stop the drug cartels. So, I guess pretty much I support the war. Well, the not war.
The U.S. is very interested in knocking down the Syrian government. They're very interested in knocking down the Iranian government after Syria. Syria is basically the domino they have to take out to get to Iran. But the U.S., and if you look at Obama, he's really talking more and more about the U.S. being a Pacific power, which means after Syria and Iran, they can go for China, possibly Russia as well in that final showdown, because they want a unipolar world. They want this world to continue. But China has a lot of contracts in Africa. China has become a very appealing partner for a number of African countries because it's not involved in Africa in the same parasitic way that the United States is involved or that these multinational corporations from Europe are involved.
They are acquaintances. 16-year-old girl was the juvenile daughters of the victim.
This is a very good read, this one, actually. illegal. Think what kind of business is it you can keep people's money and never have to deliver the underlying product. That's what banking is. Look at all pieces of paper in the UK. It's got promise to pay the
в иностранных государствах обычно заканчивается одним – приходом к власти радикалов. Я уже не говорю, что в какой-нибудь момент такие действия, которые подрывают государственный суверенитет, могут закончиться вполне себе такой полноценной региональной войной. И даже, никого не хочу пугать, с применением ядерного оружия. Об этом должны помнить все.
This statement is an obvious message directed to the Obama administration indirectly and the financial power that controls it. Since the illegal war launched in Libya last year and even the more unlawful assassination of Muammar Gaddafi, the administration has done nothing but show a disgusting abuse of executive power and criminal disregard for domestic and international law, a disregard that nations like Russia and even high-level U.S. military officials view as threats to national sovereignty. Russia has repeatedly stated that that is the issue over military intervention in Syria and Iran: sovereignty.
We love America. Capitalism is sexy.
You're not the problem. You're the...
Wait, you want to call something specific we're saying ignorant, or you want to just call us names? You want to use ad hominem attacks, or you want to get down to something substantial? That's what I thought.
There's one thing you can't argue with ignorance. And he wants an argument, and you can't argue with his ignorance, because it's not going to prove a thing. It will prove nothing to argue.
I'm still waiting for something substantive.
The only people who don't want to disclose the truth are people with something to hide.
Let's begin with the rising tensions between Israel and Iran. Sanctions put into place by the United States and the European Union are starting to hurt the people of Iran in a major way, with access to food and other imports blocked. Now, the West hopes that the pain will bring Iran back to the bargaining table in terms of its nuclear program. In the meantime, Israel is stepping up its threats that an attack on Iran may be imminent, with Israel's Defense Minister Ehud Barak drawing a line in the sand. He calls it the, quote, zone of immunity, the point at which Israel could no longer put off taking action. But in the West's efforts to isolate Iran, India has announced it will send a delegation into Iran and has now emerged as the #1 customer of Iranian oil. Now, there are new indications China also will send in officials, and this global chess match looks like it may be a messy one.
Well, from assassinated scientists to downed drones to mysterious explosions, some argue that the U.S. and Israel are already in a covert war with Iran. And from the rhetoric we are hearing from the Republican presidential candidates and government leaders, it seems that there is a push for an all-out war with the country. Take a look.
I think our goal should be the replacement of the Iranian dictatorship.
That madman in Iran. To keep Iran from having a nuclear weapon.
The right response to that would have been to go in immediately after it had gone down and destroy it.
If we have an avowed madman who uses that nuclear weapon to wipe nations off the face of the earth.
Iran's nuclear and ballistic missile activity poses a real threat.
I would say to the government in Iran today, you have a very short time to solve this on your own, and if you don't, we will solve it for you, and we frankly couldn't care less what the rest of the world thinks.
But I think the Iranians have to believe as well that, and particularly their leadership, believe that America would consider taking military options.
We may be past the point of no return in the sense that Iran does have inside the country everything it needs to produce a nuclear weapon.
Maximum covert operations to block and disrupt the Iranian program, including taking out their scientists, including breaking up their systems, all of it covertly, all of it deniable.
Take everything at our disposal to make sure that Iran does not have a nuclear weapon.
Would I go to war to stop them from getting a nuclear weapon if that ultimately was what necessary?
They're one of the 4 state sponsors of terror in the world.
There are training camps, jihadist training camps in Central and South America. They're working with the drug cartels, and they are planning assaults on the United States. That's what we know is going on right now.
So it seems the U.S. is eager to engage in another war, the justification this time being that Iran is developing their nuclear weapons program. And now the mainstream media is adding fuel to the fire and pushing to add other countries to the list of terrorism contenders. It's all thanks to a documentary that portrays Venezuela, Cuba, and Iran as teaming up in
to get out quickly and follow through. And similar policies on our other wars, including our drone wars and our secret wars. I mean, this is the American position. We are out of money, not to mention the immorality of what we are doing. And if we don't end these wars and scale back the war preparation, the Pentagon war machine dramatically, we will not be able to pay for anything else. And of course, that is the bipartisan plan and why they are after Social Security post-election. But we have to take this message to both of those parties. They are now the 2 branches of our government, regardless of the election down the road, and demand a dramatic shift.
David, in the beginning of this segment, we showed a clip from whitehouse.gov. This was President Obama laying out the plan in 4 minutes or less, about 3 minutes or 55 seconds. He did that back.
We have moved past the tipping point for global war in the Middle East. Aircraft carriers crowd the Persian Gulf, the U.S. Navy having recently deployed a 4th aircraft carrier to the region, along with a fleet of underwater drones preparing for an inevitable attack on Iran. The United States having already sent 3 massive aircraft carriers to the waterways outside of Iran, including the USS Enterprise, the USS Dwight D. Eisenhower, and the USS Abraham Lincoln, will now add the USS John C. Stennis to the fleet. These ships are equipped with billions of dollars worth of weaponry and service personnel, and America's newest addition to the battlefront is invisible to those on land and can be controlled from anywhere in the world. Recent military maneuverings, as well as the deployment of a flotilla of 11 Russian warships, coincides perfectly with an upcoming UN meeting scheduled this Friday on July 20th. The United Nations will be discussing the armed conflict in Syria that has conveniently come on the heels of an intense media fury over the alleged Trimsa killings that, according to U.S. media outlets, has been a civilian massacre accounting for hundreds of civilian deaths. However, after a comprehensive UN investigation of the attack on the Syrian city on Saturday, it has been concluded that the attack on Trimsa actually targeted heavily armed rebels and terrorist groups, not innocent civilians. The findings directly contradict opposition claims of civilian killings by Assad forces. The West is playing a media blame game in order to aggravate popular support for a new war, and what is abundantly clear is that the United States is looking for a repeat of the Libyan invasion that left Muammar Gaddafi brutally murdered. The mainstream media cry for humanitarian aid is really just a mask for a violent U.S.-led regime change in Syria. President Barack Obama and Secretary of State Hillary Clinton want Bashar al-Assad dead, and if they have their way, a bloody and violent new global war is about to erupt.
And people find out about it, even if those truths are inconvenient. And in response, we're seeing all kinds of legislation to crack down on this. We saw SOPA, and now the same guy is introducing HR 1981, a surveillance bill. And I think they're just trying to dismantle the internet, basically. They don't want it to remain this international free thing where people can transfer information and people can self-organize. So I think they're doing everything in their power to stop the internet in its current form.
You know, I used to think of America as being the land of the free. But I'm afraid that when those towers came down, and when George Bush said he was going to launch a war on terror, that has in fact now become a war on liberty. And the plea bargaining system in America is such that you're put into prisons that are gang-ridden, that are violent, that are brutal, and certainly no way that we would ever consider putting people in prison. You're put in those conditions, and you're faced with a choice under a plea bargaining system. You're told that you may well not get to court for 4 years. So you'll spend the next 4 years on remand in one of these brutal prisons. You're told that your legal fees will be between $1 and $2 million. And you're told that if the jury finds against you, you face life imprisonment.
Is escalating, a lot of conflicting information on both sides, as is always the case in war. And I want to remind everybody as they go into this situation, Syria is continuing to capture foreign military officers inside their borders. The United Nations chief, on the other hand, refuses to condemn the kidnapping of Iranians inside Syria. This is getting rather weird, where you have these hired mercenary armies, which include Al-Qaeda, and now they're even saying some of the Mujahideen the U.S. used to oppose in Afghanistan are coming down to fight against the Syrian government. The U.S. is now supporting the very same people they were trying to destroy. Bad Mujahideen and everything. Of course, we supported them against the Soviet Union. Then once the Soviet Union was out, they were the enemy. Now they're the friends again. It's just switching back and forth. Patterns of expedience, I guess, is the good name for it.
Artillery. The yells of protests from the streets and the increasingly loud and numerous international opinions.
Britain needs to lead the way in making sure we tighten the sanctions, the travel ban.
Calling for the arming of insurgents in Syria.
We should start considering all options, including arming the opposition.
I'd give them training, I'd give them communications equipment, and then ultimately I'd give them weapons.
Experts say arming the fighting groups among the opposition is a sure way to drag the country into a protracted civil war. It will also further marginalize those in the opposition who have advocated nonviolence or who advance political strategies.
Between 1964 and 1973, the United States conducted a massive air war against Laos, dropping so many bombs as to make Laos, with its 2.5 million people, the most heavily bombed country in history. This was a secret war, in violation of the Geneva Accords, and kept secret from Congress and the American people. The most feared type of bomb used was a newly developed weapon known as a cluster bomb. An estimated 90 million cluster bombs were dropped on Laos. Many never exploded, leaving the countryside littered with millions of unexploded bombs, or bombies.
I'd read the figures, the 9 years of bombing, the tonnage, all the rest of it, but I'd never seen a landscape like that. It was unimaginable. I had never ever experienced anything on that scale from a technical point of view. I'd seen big minefields.
The hypno-induced psychotic public can't even hear the war drums anymore, no matter how loud. They become background music, white noise, or something to tap your foot to. With sadistic glee still warm over Gaddafi's public torture and execution through the streets of Libya, the bloodthirsty, mind-controlled Western public will count a Syrian overthrow a nice after-dinner mint, while monstrous illegal death drone attack reports on innocent civilians in Pakistan and Somalia are savored pastries while sipping their morning coffee.
Black widow. Not sure what you mean.